The Château de Chantilly is the ultimate symbol of French architectural prowess. Located 50 kilometers north of Paris, this 1,000-year-old crowning edifice is one of the country's most beautiful buildings.
Chantilly is exceptional, an extraordinary example of French heritage. It's the most beautiful representation of centuries of French architecture and landscaping.
The monumental castle covers over 10,000 square meters, as much as the Élysée Palace, with an immense garden to boot.
The surface area of Chantilly's lawn is equivalent to 6 soccer fields.
The axis is 12 kilometers long. That's still the longest in all of France.
Its great stables are the biggest in Europe.
They're as long as the facade of the Les Invalides.
Chantilly's excess even made it a rival of the world's greatest castle.
It's a mini Versailles.
We'll revisit the construction process behind this epic monument, where every step along the way was a battle.
It required a huge effort from the teams that worked here. To this day, it's strongly discouraged or even forbidden to build in these areas.
At Chantilly, you can't build normally. You have to innovate.
From its pile foundations, to the symmetry of its French gardens, to the construction of its massive dome, how did the builders accomplish the impossible? What technical feats were achieved in the 17th century by André Le Nôtre, France's most famous landscaper, in order for Chantilly to surpass Versailles?
At Chantilly, the fountains were always running.
I don't think you understand how it made Louis XIV feel.
With brand new 3D animations and interviews by the greatest experts, we'll go back through 10 centuries of construction. From a medieval fort to the princely residence it is today, this is the story of one of France's most stunning architectural projects and a historical miracle, the Château de Chantilly. Chantilly is a castle that keeps its cards close. It's primarily known today for its epic horse races and the 815 ancient paintings that make up the second largest such collection outside the Louvre. Every year, around 500,000 visitors come to stroll the estate of over 7,000 hectares, an area equivalent to inner Paris. And yet, many are unaware that Chantilly wasn't always this orderly and refined. Quite the opposite.
Chantilly's history is one of constant demolitions and reconstructions.
Chantilly is 5 castles in one.
To decipher its many phases of construction, we must go back in time almost 1,000 years. Back to the 11th century, the heart of the Middle Ages. At the time, the Kingdom of France was still ununited. The royal capital of Senlis, located 45 kilometers north of Paris, was the target of multiple attacks.
The situation was very unstable, so they needed to build up defenses.
All around the city, at multiple locations, spread over several kilometers, there were these fortresses built to protect Senlis on the road from Paris to Picardy.
But one location had proved troublesome for building a fortress. The forest of Chantilly, 7 kilometers from Senlis.
It was wetlands. The whole thing was a peat bog with wild trees.
It was agricultural land, set on a plateau with a valley cutting through it, the swampy Nonette River Valley.
The Nonette River was a stream of running water that was several meters wide, but which flowed very slowly, at only about 1.8 cubic meters per second. While it would be a significant advantage a few centuries later, notably to compete with the Château de Versailles, in the Middle Ages it was a huge inconvenience for builders.
It was extremely muddy. You had to go 10 meters deep to reach any sort of solid rock bottom on which to build. But back then, digging 10 meters deep was an impossible challenge.
To this day, it's strongly discouraged or even forbidden to build in these areas.
But a discovery would change everything.
Luckily, in the middle of that swampy valley was a rocky spur, a rock mass that made it possible to build a castle in medieval times.
The enormous but irregularly shaped limestone would be the base of the future castle. But there were other challenges to overcome before construction could begin.
The builders first needed to level the ground.
They wanted to flatten the rock to make a smooth, solid foundation upon which they planned to build the curtain walls of the structure.
Armed with only a pick, construction workers dug around and on the rock to carve out a smooth base.
They were digging on extremely hard rock, trying to encircle the castle with a moat that would naturally fill with water.
It was a highly complex operation, obviously, and very tedious work.
The notch allowed them to retrieve over 7,000 cubic meters of stone, enough to fill over 200 shipping containers. A colossal and useful reserve for all the stonework to come.
Since nothing was ever wasted in the Middle Ages, when they dug out the rock, they saved the stone to be used later for stonework.
And they would need a lot of stone in Chantilly, because at that time, builders doubled the thickness of the walls.
Back then, they built things to last. They didn't skimp for two reasons. First of all, the castle was made to be strong for the Middle Ages. It needed to withstand attacks. And secondly, in some ways out of ignorance, they didn't know how much they could reduce the thickness of the walls and still keep the structure standing. So they doubled it, and even tripled it, just to be safe. The result was that they built things that were ridiculously robust.
Here, the bedrock walls were no less than 3 meters thick. A solid base for a seriously fortified defense castle. Chantilly was born.
Chantilly had 7 high towers, and its fortification, the walls connecting the towers, were as tall as the towers themselves. That's where the artillery was based.
As testament to the extraordinary skills of those construction workers, this medieval bedrock still serves as the castle's foundation. Chief Architect of Historic Monuments, Pierre-Antoine Gauthier, explains.
We're lucky because the low-angled light reveals traces of the workers' tools. Almost every stone is identifiable by these marks. They serve as mementos of the site's construction, a sort of tribute to these highly skilled stone carvers.
Every stone carver had his own mark, and he marked his stones with that symbol to show he had carved them. That's how they calculated pay, which was done on a rolling basis.
The most pronounced medieval remains are in the moats and the towers. The bases of 2 towers still have their original arrow slits. Those are the narrow, vertical slots through which one could shoot an arrow from inside the tower to defend the castle in case of enemy attack.
And that's not all. Surprisingly, Chantilly's most striking medieval vestige is actually somewhere else. A bird's eye view is needed to see it. It's the castle's floor plan, a sort of 70-meter wide equilateral triangle that's been Chantilly's architectural matrix for over 1,000 years.
Regardless of when work was being done here, all construction workers had to base their work off of this initial triangular base, which was originally built by workers on that rock spur in medieval times.
That shape became an issue in the 16th century. when Chantilly's new owner wanted to transform the fortress into a more flamboyant royal residence. "150 years after the Middle Ages, in 1560, a new wave of construction was set to begin in Chantilly, by order of the property's new owner, known as Anne de Montmorency.
The name Anne was gender neutral. It's confusing, but Anne's actually a man.
And this was not just any man. He was one of the most powerful figures in France in the 16th century. He was constable, the highest-ranking army official, and he was incredibly rich.
Anne de Montmorency owned no less than 600 fiefdoms and 130 castles and domains, not to mention several private mansions in Paris. We know he was passionate about architecture.
This very important man, who had all sorts of properties all over France, decided to make Chantilly his primary residence. That was the real turning point in Chantilly's history, and that's when the major construction work began.
Construction that quickly became a headache for workers. Because after adding windows to the medieval castle, the owner decided he wanted to enlarge it so he could invite France and Europe's greatest kings.
You have to remember that the French royal court comprised thousands of people who all traveled together.
He thought the castle was too small and wanted to enlarge it, but the 7 towers and the triangular base were a problem. This created a need for more space in Chantilly.
That wasn't the only problem with this medieval fortress. The constable also wanted his castle to respect the architectural aesthetics of the Renaissance. At that time, new buildings featured perfectly symmetrical construction, like here in Chambord, the complete opposite of Chantilly.
The Renaissance observers looked at this structure and saw something they thought of as uncivilized. There were no right angles. It was completely bizarre.
It was difficult to do anything symmetrical on this rock.
To satisfy their patrons' demands, the workers carried out an amazing accomplishment. They decided to build an extension over the water, a smaller castle in front of the main fortress, which would be a majestic welcoming hall for guests. To undertake the incredible challenge of building on water, they based their plan on the world's largest floating city.
They built this smaller castle the same way Venice was built. They planted wooden piles in the mud beneath the water.
They used these heavy weights like pile drivers to push the piles deeper and deeper into the earth. As long as the piles kept sinking, they kept pushing.
The method required several technical precautions to keep the entire structure from collapsing.
The piles must be completely submerged at all times. That's the golden rule, because if any part sticks out of the water, that's where they're at risk of rotting. So they have to stay completely submerged. And on top of the leader piles, they built grids of beams upon which they laid the stonework foundation for the rest of the structure.
Using this system, the usable terrain was expanded by dozens of meters over the water. But a new problem quickly arose. The small castle, meant to be Chantilly's crown jewel, required radically different raw materials.
The goal here was for it to be beautiful and elegant from the outside, unlike a medieval castle.
Using the original medieval stone was out of the question. They needed to find new stone. But where? We're in Saint-Maximin, in the department of Oise, 6 meters below ground. Denis Montagne knows these gigantic galleries by heart. He's an underground cave inspector.
You see that lifting? That's natural fracturing, that big one. That's a death trap if you walk under it at the wrong time.
Now monitored, These quarries were a boon to Chantilly workers during the Renaissance. They're just 7 kilometers from the castle.
There have been excavations here for about 2,000 years. We're lucky. It's one of the largest quarries in France, with high-quality stone that was used on multiple sites for centuries.
It was used for construction in Paris, Versailles, and all the great castles.
These quarries were so popular because they contain a stone of exceptional quality.
It's a homogeneous stone of good mechanical quality. It's beautiful and reputed. It's easy to carve and it's kind to one's tools. It's basically a perfect stone.
It's a light-colored stone that looks beautiful in the Picardy sunshine. It's also a stone that lends itself well to high-quality sculptures.
But before the stone could be sculpted, it needed extracting. During the Renaissance, workers at Chantilly only had one tool at their disposal: a rudimentary pickaxe.
You remove the stone by cutting away the piece you wanted to extract from underneath.
The operation had to be repeated on every side of the block.
And then, snap, the block detaches.
It was grueling work.
Someone who worked a dozen hours a day would be able to extract about 1 cubic meter a week.
Knowing the structure was 60 meters by 30 meters meant that construction of the small castle took a long time. Too long for the constable.
They were under a lot of pressure to finish work at the right time, because the constable was coming, or because the court was coming, and sometimes they had to work quickly, maybe even too quickly, in order to meet deadlines. You can see that part of the small castle's foundation wasn't built very well, using recuperated materials that were hastily put in place. That's probably not due to a technical constraint, but more likely because the constable was impatient to see the work progress.
5 centuries later, this would result in the floor sagging 8 full centimeters. But back in the day, all seemed well. The new building was finished in only 6 years and fully met the owner's expectations. It was a perfectly symmetrical rectangular structure, built over 2,000 additional square meters, and decorated with hundreds of sculptures.
It represented elegance, mastery, diligence, and a very calculated use of ornamentation. It's a great example of geometrical expertise.
Chantilly was ready to receive and impress the great kings of Europe. This included Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, Europe's most powerful monarch.
Charles V came to Chantilly and was absolutely dazzled, to the point that he asked Montmorency to give him Chantilly in exchange for a Dutch province. Can you imagine? During the Renaissance, Chantilly was one of the greatest castles that was a kind of a template for all other construction.
But its leadership changed hands less than a century later. A new contender decided to radically transform the Château de Chantilly yet again. It was in the 1660s, under the reign of Louis XIV. A new building was capturing everyone's attention: the Château de Versailles.
It was an unusual construction site that required considerable sums of money.
Versailles has 1,400 fountains. It's crazy.
The idea was nothing could ever rival Versailles. Everyone knew that.
Everyone except the latest owner of the Château de Chantilly. He was the Grand Condé, cousin to the king and his greatest rival.
He spent most of his fortune fighting the king because he wanted to be king himself. That didn't work out, so he was punished and locked up in his castle.
So what did he do? He started a new kind of battle.
In his battle against the Sun King, the fallen prince didn't bet on the castle's architecture, but on another aspect of the estate.
He decided to focus on a different trend that was popular back then, the gardens. The French garden had been invented. All the French nobility wanted to have a French-style garden simply because it was a symbol of power and wealth. Le Grand Condé wanted to prove that he was just as powerful as the king in Versailles.
It was extremely ambitious. Chantilly had always been surrounded by marshlands. At that time, only one person seemed capable of undertaking such a monumental challenge. His name was André Le Nôtre, a genius architect and landscaper.
He was a well-respected gardener in his 40s, known for Fontainebleau, Les Tuileries, and Vaux-le-Vicomte.
He was older and experienced. His knowledge extended to architecture and mathematics alike. He was the first great landscaper in history.
The problem, when the Grand Condé contacted him, was that André Le Nôtre was already busy with another project.
Louis XIV had chosen him for the gardens of Versailles.
I think Le Nôtre leaving Versailles was not an obvious choice. He was tied to the royal estate, and all other estates were deemed secondary.
Chantilly was not just any estate. Here, there was a rare element that had long been considered a weakness: the river.
What does Chantilly have in abundance? Water, which is amazing. There's no water in Versailles.
But you have to know how to control it.
André Le Nôtre was sold. He agreed to lead both projects simultaneously. He didn't know it at the time, but he would implement technical feats at Chantilly that would surpass those at the Château de Versailles. Work began in 1662. The first goal was to clean up the swampy area.
To dry out this type of terrain, it has to be drained. That requires attempting to channel all the water into one central canal.
The area that needed draining was large, almost 7,000 hectares, the size of inner Paris. Le Nôtre planned a gigantic canal that was 60 meters wide and 2,500 meters long. As long as an airport runway. The goal was to drain the swamp.
The grading and tunneling work required for the canals was colossal. Archive documents repeatedly mention teams of 200 workers being needed to dig, tunnel, and remove the soil in order to build these canals.
150,000 cubic meters of soil was dispersed, enough to fill 5,700 semi-trailers.
The big canal was a huge undertaking for the teams that worked there.
The workers ran into another problem. As they dug, Chantilly's shallow groundwater levels began to rise. This made drainage impossible. André Le Nôtre needed to make the bottom of his canal waterproof.
He had a refined understanding of hydraulics, so he covered the bottom of his canal in clay so as to isolate the bottom and keep the groundwater levels from rising and filling the canal. Once they managed to isolate the bottom of the canal, they were able to drain the water from the banks.
After 2 years of massive construction, draining began. The soil began to dry and the river was contained. Upon seeing the immense canal, the king's rival exulted.
Versailles' canal is 1 kilometer. Chantilly's canal is 2.5 kilometers.
But a lot remained to be done to compete with Versailles. The second phase of work began, which meant symmetrically dissecting the landscape. Roads were widened, and a gigantic axis was built from north to south.
The axis is 12 kilometers long. That's still the longest in all of France.
The axis is flanked on both sides with garden lawns, featuring impressively large-scale geometric drawings.
You have to understand that the surface area of Chantilly's lawn is equivalent to 6 soccer fields, just to give you an idea.
But how did they ensure symmetry across such large distances? At the time, workers only had a knotted cord and sticks to trace the designs. And of course, André Le Nôtre's incredible talent.
He created symmetry for the human eye that made it seem perfectly symmetrical, even if it wasn't the case.
He was a genius for that. He knew how to calculate the length of a pool so that even if it was rectangular, it looked square.
His phenomenal know-how began to slowly transform Chantilly's swampy marshlands into perfectly tidy lawns. The Grand Condé's dream was coming true. But construction hit upon several major setbacks that threatened the project.
The Grand Condé's biggest problem was that he rarely saw his landscape architect, since the latter was always with the king in Versailles.
He lived like a modern-day celebrity. He would only go to Chantilly for a day or two.
When he came, it was all hands on deck. Everyone had to be ready to receive orders, to get his feedback, prepare their sketches, and organize all the work that needed to be done in time for his next scheduled visit.
There were innumerable letters saying, "Call Mr. Le Nôtre," or "Mr. Le Nôtre needs to be here," and each time Le Nôtre wasn't in Chantilly because he was in Versailles.
This was part of the rivalry. Who would get André Le Nôtre on site?
The Prince of Chantilly went so far as to charter a special vehicle for the architect, so he could get back to the castle. For there was still an element missing, and a major one at that. The waterworks had to be built so that they could run continuously, something that required exceptional technical skill at the time.
Mastering hydraulics, which was still sort of magical to people at that time, was considered the real proof of power. So the more waterworks a garden had, the more powerful the garden's owner was thought to be.
André Le Nôtre was well aware of the monumental task ahead, as it had been extremely difficult to get Versailles' fountains to work.
Versailles smelled bad sometimes. When the water ran for 20 minutes, it worked well, but then it would leak and stink, so they had to create a special way of touring the gardens.
They ran the fountains only when the king was in the gardens, and they only ran the ones around him. When the king walked through the gardens, workers ran behind him, opening the fountains upon his arrival and closing them after he left.
So how did André Le Nôtre manage to do in Chantilly what he had failed to do in Versailles? The mystery would only be revealed 300 years later. In 1994, a former engineer discovered an abandoned building near the Chantilly Gardens.
I saw this building that seemed to be completely quiet. When I asked the locals what the building was for, they said it contained machine parts. But when I asked, what machine? They couldn't tell me anything about it.
Yves Buck, with help from his friends, began researching this mysterious machine and finally found a drawing of it that dated from the 18th century.
We had started fantasizing about it. We built plans and models, and there it was.
After 18 months spent assembling the 250 parts, the enigma was finally resolved. It was a giant pump, unique in France, conceived by André Le Nôtre. In the 17th century, the only way to create waterworks was to use gravity. So André Le Nôtre designed this machine to carry the canal's water upwards.
It was powered by the Nonette River's water. It triggered this wheel, which in turn triggered the water suction and pressure pumps via gears and spinning wheels.
The water traveled via pipes beneath the pavilion's domed roof. Then it traveled through another series of pipes to a huge reservoir located on Chantilly's plateau, above the marshy valley below.
Located 10 meters above Chantilly's gardens, the reservoir could hold 33 million liters of water, the equivalent of 13 Olympic-sized pools.
Once the water was in the reservoirs, gravity pulled it into the waterfalls of the estate.
Built to feed the water jets located on the west side of the castle, this hydraulic system was extremely efficient, as evidenced by the huge waterspouts that have since disappeared. In the 17th century, they were considered the highlight of the gardens, with 100 water jets across 15 meters of incline. But how long were they powered by the Chantilly machine?
In the 17th century, the Chantilly machine was the most efficient of its kind in France, not in terms of capacity or flow, but in that it worked consistently.
Considering the volume of the reservoir, it could run for 2 days straight, without needing to start up the water pump again to fill the reservoir. 2 days straight. Can you imagine?
An unprecedented feat in France for such complex waterworks. But the thing that gave Chantilly a definitive edge over Versailles was an entirely different system created by André Le Nôtre, one that's disconcertingly simple. The fountains on the east side of the castle were too far to be powered by the machine. Le Nôtre needed another way to get the water up high. Enter the ancient aqueduct hidden in the woods.
When André Le Nôtre came to Chantilly, he discovered this aqueduct in the woods. He was amazed by the water inlet, which was higher than the French lawns by a good 9 meters.
A raised water source that ran continuously. André Le Nôtre knew he was onto something. He built a 5-meter-long diversion to feed the water into a giant 40,000-liter basin.
So from this loading basin, there was a group of pipes that literally went in every direction, connecting underground to the other basins.
To speed up the water current, he reduced the diameter, creating a water jet effect. When you turn the valve, you reduce the diameter and the water flows faster. That way, he could control the flow.
It was a masterstroke.
In Chantilly, the fountains ran non-stop. At the time, they called it the water miracle.
It was truly remarkable.
In total, it took over 7 kilometers of underground pipes to power all the waterworks at Chantilly. The gamble had paid off. Nature had been tamed. All that was left was to share this mastery with the world. On April 23, 1671, the prince invited his cousin, the Sun King, to Chantilly for a 3-day party. How would the famously grudging king react to what he would see at Chantilly?
2,000 people were there. It was one of the biggest events in Chantilly's history under the Grand Condé. At the time, the gardens were mostly finished.
He welcomed his cousin and showed off the estate, while making sure to say that everything had been done in honor of the king.
With charming guile, the Grand Condé convinced the king that Chantilly had been transformed for him. The king was delighted, and the Grand Condé rejoiced.
I don't think you understand how it made Louis XIV feel when he was invited by the Grand Condé and saw the water run around the clock, whether in the middle of the night or in the early morning. It must have been truly astonishing.
It was thanks to those waterworks successfully designed by André Le Nôtre that Chantilly surpassed Versailles for good.
Sure, deep down, the Grand Condé might have seen it as a kind of victory against the king.
The years passed. Generations of successors came to Chantilly. But the rivalry with Versailles continued even after the Sun King's death.
Work in Versailles came to a hard stop at that time, and all the workers suddenly found themselves with nothing to do. So the Grand Condé told them to come and work on his castle instead.
The new workforce would radically change the face of Chantilly, beginning with the facade of the Grand Castle.
All the upper parts were changed. Imagine there were these large towers that had lanterns and rooftops installed. They put in a lot of new windows that opened up the castle's walls.
Interior changes also took place, notably inside the small castle, which had since become the primary residence of the princes of Chantilly.
A large hall was created like the Hall of Mirrors. It had all the same features, meaning you had these Renaissance-style bay windows that were converted and enlarged. And facing the Renaissance windows were other bays covered in mirrors. The goal was for the window's light to be reflected in the mirrors, just like the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. It was a mini Versailles.
But the skill level of the Versailles workers was truly put to the test with the construction of a brand new building in Chantilly, one that would smash all records. Located 300 meters from the chateau, these are Europe's largest princely stables.
The stables are even bigger than the castle itself. That's pretty unique for any French or even any European castle.
They're as long as the facade of Les Invalides.
186 meters long, 25 meters wide. It's incredible, absolutely incredible.
Split into two gigantic naves, the stables could hold 240 horses. Decorated with exceptionally fine sculptures, this horse temple rivals any royal stable.
But it was an inordinate amount of construction that cost millions and millions.
The project, which would take over 20 years to complete and turn into the workers' worst nightmare, began with a pleasant surprise.
They came to realize that there was a lot of Saint-Maximin limestone directly beneath Chantilly's lawns.
The stone was just 100 meters from the great stables doors. A natural, gigantic stone quarry with over 2.5 hectares of stone ready to be extracted. For building something like the great stables, it was amazing.
As incredible as it may sound, beneath the great stables lies a hidden labyrinth the size of 3 soccer fields. That meant there must have been at least 50,000 stone blocks extracted from these large holes cut into the rock.
These chimneys served 2 functions. First, airflow. Second, during the process of extraction, you could place pieces of wood or timber framing and could raise the stone to the surface using a system of pulleys.
It was a way to save both time and money, because in the construction budget of something like these large stables, both the costs of the actual stone and of its transport were significant.
The workers would soon benefit from another advantage, especially during the construction of the stable's centerpiece.
The dome is exceptionally large for a stable dome. It's 28 meters high and 20 meters across.
It's a stonework masterpiece. That said, the French workers were extremely strong, talented, and technically savvy.
Their skill was undeniable, but they still had to make certain adjustments due to the extra-large size of the dome. Jean-Michel Bouchard, a master mason and Meilleur Ouvrier de France award winner, explains.
When you build a 28-meter dome across such an area, you have to counter the pressure of the stones you're placing. You place several tons of stone, but you have to carve all the stones into a certain shape so that the vertical pressure is redistributed horizontally. It goes on a slant and ends up into the walls on the sides.
They're 5 meters thick to counteract the pressure of the vaults.
The architectural prowess in all this is one we don't even realize, which is that the walls are thicker than in any medieval castle.
To ensure the dome didn't collapse, the workers also added another element to the mix: metal.
The workers were so prudent enough to add metal elements that were assembled in between the stones so as to reinforce the mechanical strength of the whole structure.
An architectural prowess that was even more extraordinary, considering it was carried out in appalling working conditions.
We know the Prince of Condé paid a surgeon to be on site to take care of any injured workers. There are witness accounts of workplace accidents. For example, one time scaffolding collapsed while workers were underneath, so of course many were injured.
But it gets worse. Workers had to deal with another unexpected threat. Nicole Garnier is the chief curator of the Chantilly estate. During renovations in 2008, she and her team made a ghastly discovery.
We found this human skull, which was given to the police, who conducted the necessary lab tests. It appears to have been a murderer. There's a bullet mark that goes straight through. Carbon dating carried out by the police revealed that this man or woman, we don't know the gender, was killed between 1650 and 1950.
According to certain records, this skull could have belonged to one of the stable construction workers.
One theory is that it was the Count of Charolais, who was the estate manager at Chantilly, and who we know killed workers during their shifts here.
He would practice his aim on workers on the roof. That's certainly one of Chantilly's numerous legends, and obviously one of Chantilly's darkest legends.
This potential homicide didn't stop work on the great stables, but the patron's death in 1740 did.
When you look at the great stables today, you can see stone facades that were left unfinished. There's an entire pavilion that was never built.
Indeed, only the pavilion's doorway was finished. On the side, one can see the stones that would have supported the building's walls. The great stables remain unfinished, yet are still proof of great architectural prowess. At the end of the 18th century, the Chantilly estate was at the peak of its splendor.
Chantilly had never been so beautiful. It was known throughout Europe and welcomed guests from all corners of the continent.
The apex was short-lived, as it all came tumbling down on July 14th, 1789. The revolution erupted in Paris. The Bastille was seized, the ruling party overthrown. After that, the revolutionaries destroyed every symbol of the old regime. Chantilly was no exception.
Chantilly was confiscated and sold as an asset to demolishers.
The castle was taken apart piece by piece and everything was sold off, including the roofing, the slates, and all the quarried stone.
A large part of the city of Chantilly was built using the stones from the Grand Castle.
In just 8 years, over 500 years of history vanished. The Grand Castle was razed to its foundation, and Le Nôtre's gardens were destroyed. Only the small castle and the great stables remained.
The French Revolution was a total disaster. It left a huge void.
Chantilly was facing its greatest challenge to date. It was impossible to imagine that 2 centuries later, the castle would stand once again. All because of one boy's obsession.
The Duke of Aumale inherited Chantilly in 1830 when he was 8 years old.
We owe Chantilly's renaissance to an 8-year-old child, Henri d'Orléans, Duke of Aumale, the 5th son of King Louis Philippe, the last French king.
After a forced 30-year exile in England, he launched a gigantic reconstruction project in 1875.
The castle cost millions of francs to rebuild. The Duke of Aumale was one of the richest men alive at the time, and restoring this place was his life's work.
To fulfill his dream, Chantilly's new owner gave the workers a highly constraining bill of specifications. To begin with, the castle had to be built on its original rock foundation.
The Duke of Aumale was known for saying, "My predecessors built this castle in this very spot centuries ago. I shall do the same."
He also required the architecture be completed in the Renaissance style.
He borrowed from other architectural designs. For example, the main door of the Château de Chantilly is a copy of the door of the baptistry at the Château de Fontainebleau. He copied the chapel of the Château de Coin. The great bell towers of the Château de Chantilly were inspired by the ancient castles in Chambord and Valençay.
To perfect the illusion, workers were required to hide any modern materials they used in the construction. This can be seen in the lighting of the new castle's largest room, the Gallery of Painting. Here, 85 of the 815 paintings owned by the Duke of Chantilly are on display. On the ceiling, striated glass tiles hide what was an ultra-modern skylight for the times. It was made of a 10-meter glass cover, along with a metallic frame, comprising 8 arcs of riveted steel.
It was the 19th century material of choice.
It was cheap, fast, and efficient.
Techniques that were revolutionary in the 19th century, but completely anachronistic for a 16th century castle. The workers thus added roofing elements all around the skylight to hide it from plain sight.
What's impressive is, if you take a boat around Chantilly, or if you wander its gardens and examine the rooftops, you won't see a hint of the skylight.
All of the modern techniques are there. They're just hidden so it doesn't feel like a modern building. Except that the castle itself is younger than the Eiffel Tower.
André Le Nôtre's gardens were also restored. The latest technical and technological advancements helped Chantilly rise from its ashes in just 10 years. It is this version of Chantilly that thousands of tourists visit every year. And if nothing has changed over the past 120 years, it's because the castle is well protected by the will of its last owner. Upon his death, the Duke of Aumale bequeathed the entire estate to the Institut de France under explicit conditions.
He specifically requested that no modification be made to the exterior or interior architecture of the castle.
His wish was to protect this exceptional place, which has turned out to be a major challenge for today's workers, especially when it comes to restoration work. Since 2004, 60 million euros have been invested in restoring the estate. Each time, the same problem comes up. How can they fix something without altering it? Take the roof of the Great Stables, for example, where the 300-year-old beams are at risk of collapsing.
The damaged parts were removed and reinforced. We used a technique that preserves the historical materials, supporting them with a modern wood structure on both sides to help reinforce them. Then it's all wrapped in metal.
We have to go back to the techniques of that time and the materials of that time in order to show respect to the premises.
It isn't Chantilly's first challenge.
Chantilly has always been under constant renovation. That's something I would say is part of the uniqueness of the castle.
It encompasses all of the most beautiful achievements in French architecture and landscaping over the last centuries. It's an extraordinary example of French heritage.
10 centuries of history and tumultuous construction. 1,000 years of unique work that has made it an icon of French architectural excellence. The Château de Chantilly was made to be fit for a prince, though it owes its legendary status to the workers that built it.